Interplanetario 2026 is happening in Spain right now, and that means seminars and that means news. And in this particular case, we've got three very large and potentially exciting things to talk about. In one case, actually physically very large, and in all cases, potentially very impactful on Infinity. And so in this video, we'll be covering all of those things, trying to break them down and explain them a little bit, including Infinity's next major rules update, which will include the spec-ops special rules, and finally the rules for Ioann Ban, the Varangian dog warrior that is going to be personally responsible for getting me back into playing Toha. Now, you will note some relatively crunchy screen grabs in this video. That's because they are taken from a live stream run by French Tesium, which if you want to watch this yourself, I will link in the video description below. Big thanks to those guys for streaming this. This is the overall picture of what's coming, with the big and important date being September 1st. Now that's going to include updates for all of Corvus Belli's products, but for this video we're interested in Infinity. And so, in about 2 weeks' time, we will be seeing the Infinity Rules version 5.3, a quote, huge army update, unquote. Now, I will note that that comes from Bostria, and Bostria will call basically anything huge. But even if we take Corvus Belli's beloved hype man with a grain of salt, we can expect updates to army, which means updates to profiles. We're going to see ITS Season 18, and we're going to see the arrival of the Spec Ops rules, which I'll go into a bunch of detail on later in this video. Now, what we don't know at this point is what balance changes will be made and what armies, if any, are receiving developer attention. The only thing we do know from the Gen Con seminar that happened recently is that any US Ariadne Ranger Force is going to be a 2027 thing, not part of the September 2026 update. We also don't know generally if this is going to be on kind of the same scale as the October 2025 update, which was a massive shot in the arm to the game in terms of variety and novelty, although it did of course introduce vehicles in their current incarnation, which have had, let's call it politely, a very significant impact on the metagame. Now, we know from the Gen Con seminar that Corvus Belli are aware of how the meta has progressed since 2025, and that they are aware that vehicles are generally considered to be a little bit of a balance problem, or perhaps an experience problem. Many experienced players do know how to handle vehicles, but if you don't handle them just right, even if you are an experienced player, vehicles can blow someone out. If you're an inexperienced player, you can often just be left kind of dazzled and wondering how you were supposed to stop that. And so the play experience problem that vehicles can represent, we know CB are aware of that. So I would expect, I don't know, but I would expect to see some updates there. Optimistically, it would also be cool to see some armies get specific developer attention. Most of the factions in the game at this point have seen at least some attention since N5 was released, but there are still a few that are kind of limping along. Toha, Onyx Contact Force, White Banner, none of these are necessarily, okay, well Onyx is kind of bad, but the others are not necessarily bad, but they would really benefit from a little bit of a refresh. And so if that remaining 1/3 or so of factions that didn't see updates over the course of Infinity's first year and a bit, if they get any tweaks or touches, that would be really, really cool. Version 5.3 also means that we can expect to see core rules changes, but apart from the introduction of Spec Ops, no idea what that will include. Infinity ITS Season 18 means rules changes as well, and that is absolutely going to flow down into everyone's play. It is pretty universal in Infinity that even casual play follows the rules of the ITS season and incorporates any seasonal variants. We've had the Sashas in our list for the last year, and so from September 1st, they're probably going to be rotating out and reverting back just to the small number of factions that will be their long-term home. What we can probably expect are maybe new scenarios, maybe a rotation in scenarios, and almost certainly new seasonal rules, which if I had to guess would probably tie into Spec Ops, but exactly how that will be the case I have no idea. Overall though, very exciting. And as much as at this point in the timeline, yeah, we can look back on October and go, look, mostly I love almost all of the October changes that were made. I even like the vehicle changes, but I am still of opinion right now that, yeah, we could wind some of those back a little bit, and let's bring a few other things to the fore. The October update in 2025 was generally considered to be a bit of a magnum opus and a high point, and yes, balance issues from it have shaken out over the course of 12 months, but I really liked that update, and so I'm pretty optimistic about only 2 weeks away now, 1st of September. Now, one of the things that we do know is going to be in the army update, and which we finally have a profile for after months and months of edging us with this guy, is Ioann Ban, Varangian Dog Warrior. He has two profiles. You can see them. They are only differentiated by a small difference in points cost. The 32-point profile can take smoke grenades. The 30-point profile has damage 6 regular grenades. They are otherwise identical. The first profile with smoke grenades works for the Tartary Army Floor Corps, Cosmoflotilla, O12, Starmada, and Tohar, and profile number 2 works for JSA, Shinden Butai, and Next Wave. Next Wave is a little bit of a surprise, but yep, he works for them as well. What does this profile look like? Well, it is an upgraded and upgunned Dog Warrior. A lot of skills there that are very common to the Dog Warrior archetype, including very good quality move, very good quality physical stats, good CC, berserk. In this case, he has martial arts level 3, which is very significant. And that makes him the best close combatant on any Dog Warrior that has existed to date, as even McMurrah only has martial arts level 2. I would argue McMurrah's CC weapon is probably better, as he has a damage 3 APDA CCW, whereas Ean Ban has a damage 4 APT2 CCW. That's a perfectly serviceable sword. It's very good, but double action does tend to be more consistent to a single lucky armor roll. And as a Dog Warrior, he has the Transmutation skill, which means that at the end of any order in which he takes a single wound, he transmutes from his first form into his second form. Now, this is something that's particularly interesting, is he is almost fully effective in his regular Dogface form. All he gains moving between forms is 1 point of close combat, which does matter, but CC22 Martial Arts 3 is fine. 2 points of Fizz, which don't impact his close combat abilities at all, they just impact how good he is with those grenades or smoke grenades, and then some armor and BTS. That means there's no rush to get him transmuted, and you can really make full use of all 3 of those wounds. In terms of his armaments, apart from the CC weapon and the grenades which we've mentioned, both profiles are packing a +1 burst chain rifle, a +1 special dice viral tactical bow, and an AP heavy pistol, and he has the ballistic skill attack -3 special rule. Now, how does this all come together? Well, he's pretty close to what we expected. He is an expensive, kitted out Dog Warrior. Clocking in at 30 to 32 points, he is not going to be easy to include in any list, but he packs just a lot of throw weight as a kind of rapid offensive unit. The kind of piece that can move very quickly up the board and do a lot of damage and is hard to stop. How I categorize rapid offensive unit as a category of trooper is the kind of model that can make its own breach in enemy defenses and then exploit that breach. He will absolutely work well with good support firepower to pin down things that might suppress his advance, but he is fast enough and tough enough and dangerous enough that if he needs to, he can blow his own hole through an enemy defense and then take advantage of that. That's what makes a rapid offensive unit work, as distinct from, say, a warband that might need supporting fire or suppressive fire on enemy positions to move forward itself. And generally speaking, this kind of profile tends to be expensive and tends to be really good. This is where things like vehicles and Sujans and Bearpods and Dog Warriors live, and they're a good class of unit. Now, while he is expensive, and in particular all of those various weapons that he's carrying are increasing his cost, his ability in particular makes him unique is the ability to present a dangerous ranged fork before he closes into melee. Most other Dog Warriors, especially regular Dog Warriors and Cameronians, are fast and annoyingly tough and throw really good smoke and tend to be good with things like grenades, but it's not until you get to McMurrah that you get to a profile that is actually dangerous, or like really dangerous. If you're using a piece like a Dog Warrior, a regular generic Dog Warrior, much of the time what you're doing is either threatening the chain rifle and then just forking it with a Fizz 16 burst 1 grenade, which can do plenty of damage. But because regular Dog Warriors and even Cameronians are just kind of okay in close combat as well, without any really notable skills, it's not until you get to McMurrah that you have that ability to actually really just punch into something and take it down. That's what you'd expect from models that are point costed that way. But what makes Ban unique is that in addition to being very, very good in close combat, he's actually shockingly dangerous at ranged as well. He has the Burst 2 chain rifle, but then to back that up and present a ranged fork against anyone that dodges, he's got, and he'll usually be using, the Burst 3 AP heavy pistol with ballistic skill attack -3. If he's caught someone out of cover, that's 3 dice on 14s with BS attack -3. And if you were to choose to oppose that with an attack yourself, well, he'll just hit you with 2 chain rifles. He's got immunity armor and 3 wounds. And the lethality of that ranged attack, even if it is very short ranged, that is something that's unique to him compared to dog warriors and similar melee kind of rapid offensive units of this type. So that's something to really watch out for, is how much damage he can do just coming around a corner 8 inches away before he starts making berserk attacks. The second thing that is notable about him having BS attack -3, and to a lesser extent the +1 special dice on the tactical bow, is that while these don't work on the chain rifles, BS attack -3 does not work on a direct template weapon, it only applies when there is a face-to-face roll. These skills do come together to potentially make him much harder to kill than many other dog warriors in your opponent's active turn. Now, anyone who has tried to grapple with dog warriors knows that they just tend to succeed their dodges or throw their smoke grenades just often enough to make them a little bit too difficult to put down easily in active turn. But with the right tools and the right guns, you can absolutely even just use a combi rifle some of the time to put down something like a dog warrior if it doesn't get lucky. With Ioann Ban, we've got smoke grenades with ballistic skill attack -3 on his most common profile. And that means that if you roll up on him without a visor and he throws that smoke grenade is a ballistic skill attack and a face-to-face roll, which means the BS attack -3 applies on your incoming fire. He's rolling for a 16 and you're rolling for whatever you would normally have -3 unless you're a warhorse. And there is a very good chance that this is going to make him actually frustratingly hard to kill with regular firepower in your active turn. You are going to want to roll up with actual MSVs if you can against him, because dealing with that smoke BS attack -3 at any range is just going to make it like we've all played against things with dodge -3. We know how annoying it is to put down a model like Arindak or Pandora. And this is a defensive capability that Bann has. He can also even combine it with his tactical bow if he's engaged at short range. I see that tactical bow mostly as an ARO piece, even though his ballistic skill is not particularly good. 2 dice is 2 dice, and 2 dice with ballistic skill attack -3 is just an ARO that we don't expect from something like a dog warrior. In terms of surprises about his profile, I think the only thing that we didn't really expect is that he is irregular. Most people I spoke to, as he's a Varangian, were expecting him to be a regular trooper. Irregular is not a big deal, that's totally fine. He will still do all of his work. He's good at spending his own irregular order. And frankly, I think he's plenty expensive as is. He doesn't need to be more expensive from being regular. The other kind of surprise is that he doesn't work for White Company. I don't know if that was ever spoiled, but he might have worked for them. They have access to Varangian guards. He's a Varangian guard, but nope, not in White Company. Instead, he's in a bunch of other factions, as mentioned previous. Now, while he is obviously potentially quite useful in several of those factions that he can join, generally speaking, I think his expense is going to make him something you have to be fairly considered about including. You can't just casually slap a 32-point model into a list without having a pretty specific plan for it. And so where I'm most interested in him is in Toha, kind of unsurprisingly. He adds the most utility I can see there because he does several things they can't currently do very well and works well with their existing mechanics. A big weakness that Toha have is that their turn 1 throw weight just isn't particularly strong. Toha tend to have relatively limited order counts. The extra orders that they can take are usually constrained to visibility control from their lieutenant. And the stuff in Toha that is most powerful tends to be inside 4/4 move fire teams that don't have extra orders. And so the ability of a Toha player to aggressively push up the board and deal damage on turn 1 is kind of amongst the most limited of any factions, and Ioann Ban just completely changes that. If he is in your list, he represents an existential threat that your opponent must try to defend against that, And any time you get to force your opponent's hand, that's something that you can work with. If they don't respect him, he can just deliver a Thunderbolt hit. If they do respect him, there are all sorts of things Toha can combine with him to get good service out of. He can be given symbiomates and symbiobombs as currently written because he's a transmutation trooper. He will work well with Toha's visibility control to let him close, and Toha active turn firepower is not fantastic, but it's good enough to be a threat to some of the pieces your opponent might put on Overwatch to oppose Ioann Ban. On top of all of that, he is the first reliable source of regular smoke for Toha in like 2 editions, because we finally have actual decent fizz smoke. It hasn't been really since Preceptors in N3, like the last time Preceptors were viable, that you might consider including regular smoke and MSV in your Toha list to take advantage of. Well, now, back in N5, finally, we might choose to combine Ioann Ban and his regular smoke grenades in Toha with some MSV shooting. And so a piece that I will be putting in my list that use him first is the Tagma MSV2 Viral Sniper. Firstly, because it's a reasonably lightweight, reasonably cheap, hidden MSV2 piece that could be used to suppress enemy AROs or get a cheeky kill. And secondly, that the Tagma brings counterintelligence, which, if I'm going first and trying to push this guy to my opponent's deployment zone, that's something that's really valuable. So that's just an immediate combo that I want to try, which means that I am excited about Toha for basically the first time this edition, which is really, really nice. I won't wax on about how I think Toha are a little bit behind the curve. Overall, I would say that what has basically happened to Toha is that their strengths, the ability to have multiple reasonably resilient troopers, have just become everyone's strengths. Everyone has access to a decent amount of utility fire team power now. Everyone has access to heavy infantry or multi-wound troopers if they want them. And so the things that Toha did that were unique have just become kind of baseline for the game, while they in turn did not pick up the strengths that everyone else has. So as a Toha player, I am very excited about this guy and how he changes the construction of our lists. From Ban, we get to Spec Ops and Team Ops, probably the largest part of the rules update that we can expect to see, and the big new variants that are being added to the game. Now, to my knowledge, these are both optional variants, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that is something to bear in mind. They are something that you will have to agree with your opponent, or which a TO will have to set to include into the game. But again, we'll talk about that toward the end. The first of those 2 modes is Spec Ops, which is where you have a single Spec Ops trooper. This version you will absolutely have to agree with your opponent to use, because under Spec Ops you get a single Spec Ops trooper added to your army, I believe, for free. That was mentioned in the seminar. And so obviously you can't have one player using Spec Ops and one player not, because it would just be one free trooper to one player's list. A Spec Ops is chosen from a variety of base profiles like any other regiments, and then you choose 2 options from a chart to improve that trooper. This chart includes things like small stat and equipment bonuses, albedo -3, MSV, I think there's a mine layer option, etc. That's a medium infantry trooper to begin with. From the second active turn of the game onwards, that medium infantry can request a Helldiver style spec ball, which will land on the battlefield and give them a variety of upgrades. One of those upgrades automatically is the transition to a heavy infantry profile. The spec ball's got power armor in it, they pull that power armor out, they put that on, and then in addition, there's a second bonus you can pick from the spec ball chart, which includes weapons or equipments or a synchronized remote that you can add to your Spec Ops trooper. So for example, the Pan-Oceanian Indigo Spec Ops starts with Ballistic Skill 13, Willpower 12, Armor 2, BTS 3. It's a medium infantry with a variety of profiles to select from, with things like there's a profile with a multi-rifle and a medikit. Couldn't see much more because it was some very crusty optics at that point. But you'll pick one of those options and then at list construction choose, say, MSV1 and Mine Layer plus EM mines. And so she'll be a trooper that has a multi-rifle and a medkit and an MSV1 and mine layer. Okay, cool. When she calls down the spec ball, she'll upgrade, she'll put on the heavy armor, she'll upgrade to a 6-2 move trooper with ballistic skill 14 and armor 4, still BTS 3, 2 vitality, etc. From the spec ball, you might also choose a wild parrot, but you get to customize that element during game. Now, obviously, a free trooper that is a medium infantry that then turns into a heavy infantry is very powerful, because anything free by definition has a near infinite cost to value ratio. Not completely free, obviously. I believe the Spec Ops does still use one of your trooper slots. But if you're playing the Spec Ops variant, you will always include the Spec Ops. This has got a lot less customization than the old Spec Ops rules, but that's absolutely for the best because the old Spec Ops rules had just a bunch of different ways to try and build something that was kind of broken. There were some combinations that just didn't really work very well. There were a bunch of bad choices that you can make. It was a fun concept, but I think for definitely for good reason, the old Spec Ops rules kind of fell by the wayside after their heyday in N3. This is much more constrained, it's intended to be much more balanced. Starting from a bunch of preset profiles gives a much more design controlled game experience, but it is still a little bit of reactivity during your turn. The process of that upgrade into the heavy infantry is pretty cool, but this is very much the casual version of this rule set. The competitive version of this rule set is called Team Ops, and it is a second variant rule entirely, but which uses many of the same rules. In this version, you don't have the upgrading trooper. Instead, you start with a Haris team of the medium infantry spec ops, the heavy infantry spec ops, and the remote that would otherwise be a peripheral, i.e., everything in the spec ops box inside one Haris, and they form a Haris team. That Haris team is in addition to any fire team allowances you have. So, for example, in vanilla Nomads, who would normally have 2 duos and 1 Haris, I think you'll now have a second Haris, but that Haris can only be comprised of the Team Ops Trooper, and it is always the single medium infantry, the single heavy infantry, and the single remote. Each of those troopers picks one Spec Ops bonus from a table, and it cannot be the same bonus for each trooper. There are some very powerful things that you can potentially choose from, but you can't choose that same powerful thing over and over. So, for example, tactical awareness is one of the options that you could pick for one of your troopers. But which trooper are you going to pick it for? You will probably almost always choose it. But are you giving tactical awareness to the heavy infantry, or are you giving tactical awareness to the medium infantry so that you can give the heavy infantry with the big gun an MSV1? The skills are absolutely powerful as far as we can tell, but that level of customization has some interesting choice. You have to figure out where the powerful stuff will go, even if probably you'll be picking some of the same things every single game. Or for every single list, who gets what is some interesting choices. On top of that level of customization, just like with Spec Ops, you have the spec ball mechanic for these guys as well. This spec ball does not turn the medium infantry into a heavy infantry because you have the heavy infantry on the field already, but it does give one trooper one of the options from the chart, and this version of the spec ball remains on the board as an armed turret. Anyone who was playing N5 since the beginning of N5 will probably own a few armed turrets. They absolutely fell off the wayside, fell by the wayside when they got made non-reloadable, and so it's nice to be able to use at least some of those again. What we don't know but are relatively sure about for Spec Ops and Team Ops at this stage, as I mentioned, is that both are optional game modes, which means that they aren't in the base game by default. That's a really good way for rules variants to just never quite make it into formal play, but I have a little bit of optimism about Team Ops in particular, because all of the Team Ops profiles, unlike Spec Ops, all of the Team Ops profiles are supposed to have actual points costs and to be balanced against other things you might take in your list, even with all of the extra bonuses that they get. So I'm assuming that they'll be relatively expensive because any one of them, for example, could have tactical awareness. And this leaves me with two things that I am kind of hopeful about. The ideal end state for me, the one that I really hope is where we end up, is that, yep, Spec Ops, the full customizable free trooper, that's an occasional thing people will play with, sometimes perhaps for narrative events or campaigns. But what I would love with Team Ops is to end in a situation where they kind of become part of default play because hopefully the balance of each of those profiles and the balance of those fire teams is just in line with anything else that you might take. And so if one person turns up at the local game store with a Spec Ops, a Team Ops team in their list, and another person doesn't, those two players will still have a perfectly balanced game in terms of the forces that they have access to, and no one will feel like the other person had access to a resource that was unfair. The kind of dream end state is where you can run events with Team Ops as a variant, and like maybe half to two-thirds of the players use it and half to one-third of the players don't, because some lists just won't want these team ops teams and some lists will. All of the models that I have seen, all of the renders, all of the 3D sculpts, the painted models look fucking awesome, and so I would love to own these. But I also don't want them to be auto takes, because if they're auto takes, then they won't ever form part of default play. They have to be balanced against the rest of the game, like pretty tightly dialed in to a point, as I mentioned, where some players will want them and some players won't. Some players won't, in order for them to be something that you can feel comfortable adding to a list that you'll turn up to the local game store on game night to actually play with. You can just say, oh, hey, I've got team ups in this list, do you mind? And your opponent will be like, yeah, that's totally cool, I don't, but I didn't want to. I think those two lists should still be balanced, let's play a game. That's the ideal, and if that happens, then tournament organizers can also just include this often and by default. You could even have a situation where ITS could do something to encourage team ops, even in situations where the tournament organizer maybe doesn't think to include them. You could have team ops as a default in an ITS season. I'm not sure I necessarily want to see that out the gate, because that's a really strong way of saying everyone must go out and buy one box immediately, which would be a little bit anti-consumer, even with Infinity's quite permissive proxy rules. But the overarching point is, if they nail the balance for these, if the points costs of the team ops teams are just reasonably balanced against anything else you might spend those points and troop slots on, then we as players have got a lot more freedom to actually use these. And if we've got freedom to use them, they could find their way into default play, and I would love to see that, because the idea of these little Haris teams of special operators, and the models especially that they're releasing for these, like, man, the Nexus operator with his like super muscle arms in the heavy infantry version, they're really, really cool, and it would be a shame not to see them on the table. So I'm pretty keen and optimistic, and just chucking the September 1st update back on screen, there's a lot that's coming that's cause for potential excitement. So we'll end the video there. From what we've talked about today, what are you interested in and what are you excited in? Let me know in the comments. Do you think you'll play team ops in casual games if the rules are reasonably balanced? What models would you use for that? Are you interested in the models that they've shown off, or do you have your own plans for conversion? Do you have any hopes for changes in terms of things like balance updates or army updates? And what do you think we'll see from ITS Season 18? Let me know. I do enjoy reading all of your comments. I respond to any of them that I can, and I always read all of them. We'll absolutely be covering some of these updates when the update drops. And for the small but dedicated crowd that have been asking for Toha content, yep, it's probably on the way now, because I'm excited to play some of them. Otherwise, and as always, I hope very much that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.